The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Revival or resistance? That is the question facing the American people as another July 4th comes and goes. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As a nation more divided by the day, are we headed for a revival of or resistance to the nation's founding principles? We'll explore that question from multiple angles with Sarah Cowgill, Jeff Charles, and Scott Cosenza of LibertyNation.com as we ask the question, what does it mean to be a patriot circa 2019?
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
But we kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, as we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Much to the chagrin of his many critics, President Trump delivered a July 4th stemwinder at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington with soaring rhetoric honoring the nation's heritage of freedom.
With a single sheet of parchment and 56 signatures, America began the greatest political journey in human history. As the delegates debated the Declaration in Philadelphia, Washington's army watched from Manhattan as a massive British invading fleet loomed dangerously across New York Harbor. The British had come to crush the revolution in its infancy. Washington's message to his troops laid bare the stakes. He wrote, "The fate of unborn millions will now depend under God on the courage and conduct of this army. We have therefore to resolve to conquer or die." The faraway king would soon learn a timeless lesson about the people of this majestic land. Americans love our freedom, and no one will ever take it away from us.
Sure seemed like a harmless speech, even for those afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome. But, of course, that was not the case over at the headquarters of the resistance, CNN, where the talking heads criticized Trump for everything from the military themes to the simplistic speechwriters.
I'm just troubled about the militaristic tone of this whole thing. First, we retreated to essentially 8th grade history that was fairly sepia-toned and saccharine. I heard nothing other than a pledge to put the American flag on Mars. I heard nothing in this speech about where this country should be going.
It reminds you that his speechwriters are not the best in the business. Other presidential speechwriting teams have been a whole lot better. Sometimes it just seems like he's reading a Wikipedia page about historical events.
It almost felt at times like the president was sort of like, oh, wow, look at all these things that America has done. His whole pitch going back 3 years has been Make America Great Again. If you listen to that speech, turns out America was great the whole time.
Let me be subtle here. At a professional level, 25 years in national security, I hated it. At a personal level, I hated it more.
Sure you did. That's why you're on CNN, where if Trump walked on water, the headline would likely be that he can't swim. But some Trump haters couldn't even wait for Trump's actual speech to attack the president, like far-left columnist Eugene Robinson of the once credible Washington Post, who got all hot and bothered on MSNBC when plans for the celebration were first announced.
To take this and to make it into what seems to be kind of a combination Trump rally and Kim Jong-un style military parade of hardware and equipment with Sherman tanks, which is ridiculous. It's just obscene.
Obscene. Trump's patriotic celebration, just obscene. But that's just a reminder of how the American flag has become anathema to the left-wing resistors, as we witness from the famed shoe company Nike, who pulled an entire line of shoes that were set to be released because the sainted Colin Kaepernick objected to their inclusion of the Betsy Ross flag from Revolutionary Times with 13 stars emblazoned on the back. And radical race baiters like Michael Eric Dyson on MSNBC piled on, saying that flag is a symbol of white supremacy.
It's the recent use of this flag that has been most opprobrious. Right-wing white supremacists have used it as a rallying cry for their own cause. So right now, this flag has been used by people who want to pummel African Americans, Latinx, Jews, and other people, neo-Nazis who want to claim that they have their true copyright on American identity. Words matter, symbols matter too. Why don't we wear a swastika for July 4th?
Opprobrious. Very impressive. Folks, these are the kind of people who want to run the country. People who believe that a celebration of all things American is really just an extended racist dog whistle. And we witnessed another iteration of the love and tolerance and blissful diversity of the far left in recent days when a meek conservative journalist just covering a protest in Portland, Oregon, a gay journalist at that, was savagely attacked by a gang of hooded Antifa thugs, and Andy Ngo lived to tell about it on Fox News.
While hearing people chant, "No hate, no fear," I'm suddenly bashed on the back of my head. A mob of people, all dressed in black and wearing masks, started beating me with their fists, and some of them used objects to hit me. I put my arms up to try to shield my face, as well as to signal to them that I was surrendering and that I wasn't there to fight, but that really signaled to them to be more aggressive. So then they started dumping eggs, throwing it at my face, which blinded me, and I was kicked some more, punched some more, and all this time I kept thinking, where are the police?
There, my friends, is the tolerant, loving resistance, fomenting violence, just the kind of people who stoked the infamous conflagration in Charlottesville when they initiated violent attacks against white supremacists and turned a protest by people legitimately upset about the removal of historical statues, along with a group of extreme wackos who could have simply been shamed by ignoring them, into a national disgrace. And we'll be back to ask the question, what does it mean to be a patriot circa 2019?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So what does it mean to be a patriot circa 2019? We thought that'd be a good question to put to a couple of our authors at LibertyNation.com on this July 4th weekend. First, we welcome in our Heartland correspondent, Sarah Cowgill, joining us from southern Indiana. Sarah, welcome.
Good day to you, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure as always. So let me ask you a simple question with maybe a complicated answer. What does it mean to you to be a patriot?
Well, it's not that complicated. Following the Constitution that, our founding fathers, through blood, sweat, and tears, bequeathed this country, a gift. It was a social experiment that nobody thought would last. And here we are. We're the country that people are dying to get into, literally, from the southern border. We are the standard. People want to be Americans. Nobody wants to stand in line to get in Venezuela or Cuba or frankly, Europe, unless you're Syrian. It was a do or die effort, and we need to embrace that and stay, patriotic for them, for what they gave us.
You make an interesting point, which is that even many of the founders thought that this experiment in democracy, or more specifically a constitutional republic, wouldn't last more than a generation. But here we are 243 years later. Now, Sarah, how do you react to the statement, my country, right or wrong?
I agree. I was hopeful when President Obama was elected. I was hopeful that we were going to see a unification that had, I don't think, it's not that we didn't have a unification, but I thought maybe his leadership might spark some confidence in the minority populations. And instead, it didn't. But Barack Obama was my president until he wasn't. And this was my country, and I felt, it was time to rise up and do something about it.
So we're in a time of revival and resistance. So let me ask you this. Should only those who want to revive the founders' vision of America as opposed to resisting it be considered patriots?
Oh, no, I think everybody's a patriot. But they have to understand the resistance. They have to understand that our Constitution and our country and how our troops have enabled our freedoms, they have to understand they can't replace that with socialism. They can't.
Now, has America's willingness to elect its first black president a globalist, and then its first true outsider, he of America first, an indication that our spirit of independence is alive and well, or an indication that we continue to sort of lurch uncontrollably back and forth between radically different and contradictory belief systems?
I really do believe that right now there's not an American, there's not a member of our electorate that doesn't have a stand on something. The apathy, the lethargic citizens, the people who 8 years ago or 4 years ago claimed, I don't get involved in politics, I don't want to have anything to do with it, it doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count. All of those people, they're gone.
So, are we headed for a cold civil war or worse? Are we already in one?
Well, my friend, we are on the precipice and the wind is howling. It's howling. That storm is upon us. It's going to take one little breath of putrid air to push it over the side, and it's going to be a hot one. It's not going to be a cold civil war. It's going to be a hot one, and I believe it's here. We just haven't seen the first bloodshed.
Thank you, Sarah.
Anytime, my friend.
Appreciate it much. Well, thanks, Sarah Cowgill, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. And next, we bring in Jeff Charles, race relations and media affairs correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Welcome, Jeff. And I'll put the same questions to you as I did to Sarah. Let me start with this one. What does it mean to you to be a patriot?
To me, being a patriot, it means having pride in your country, despite it not being perfect. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that in order to be patriotic, you have to think your country is perfect and can do no wrong. That's not the case. To me, I think America is great despite its mistakes and despite its flaws. I think we have the best value system on the planet. So to me, that's what being a patriot is recognizing that.
Now, I hardly claim to speak for all white people, and I always hate to ask someone to represent their entire race, but at least from an impressionistic standpoint, which of the two narratives is most predominant, do you think, among black people in America? That Trump is a virulent racist, as the resistance claims, or that Trump's full employment economy has lifted their boats along with everyone else's, as the revivalists claim?
Yeah, I think you get a little bit of both in the black community. I think, unfortunately, the left's messaging about Trump has been pretty successful with the black community. But it's been that way with any Republican president. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why the GOP needs to make a more concerted effort to get into black communities. But at the same time, there are a lot of black people, even if they don't even like Trump, they still will give him credit for the economy and what that has allowed more blacks to be at work and to do the things that they want to do. So it's kind of a mixed bag, because I think a lot of them may not even say it out loud, but they may even still recognize that Trump has done really well with the economy and with lowering the unemployment rate.
Now, on this whole issue of revival versus resistance, should only those who want to revive the founders' vision of America as opposed to resisting it be considered patriots?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that quite a bit. I mean, because when I was younger, I could safely say that both Republicans in general and Democrats in general were patriots. We just kind of differed on how things should be done. But being a liberal Democrat is far different from what we're seeing today. So having pride in one's country, it means that you have pride in its foundation and its foundational values, even when it doesn't always reach that bar that was set back then. But when you get to the progressives and the leftists, they don't really like the country the way it is. So it's hard to say that they're patriots. They might be patriots if the country looked more like what they're trying to change it into. But right now, they want to change it so drastically that they want it to not really even look like the America that was meant to be and that it is right now. So I think you always have that disconnect. But I think that's why a lot of them wouldn't even call themselves patriots.
Okay, here's the last question for you, and it's a tough one. Are we headed for a cold civil war or worse, or are we already in one?
We're already in one. We're already in a cold civil war. The best hope is that it doesn't devolve into a hot civil war, which I don't think will happen, but it's always possible. I think the best solution is for us to come out of the cold civil war, get back to normal civil political discourse, which, by the way, the majority of the country wants. The people who are fighting and are at odds with each other and calling each other names and things like that, these are the fringe of both sides. But unfortunately, they tend to be the loudest and they tend to get the most attention. So I would say that we are in a bit of a cold civil war. It may not be as pronounced as some people are making it sound, but I think it's already happened. Like, the division is there, and now we have to work towards healing that rift.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Most appreciated. We'll break away for a moment, then come back with that single question which faces America and its founding principles. Are we headed for revival or resistance?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
truth
is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Revival or resistance? That is the ever more present question on this July 4th weekend. And with the frenzied pace of the last 2.5 years slowed a bit on a weekend that's thankfully more like a dull roar than the pitched battle we've witnessed in recent times in this ever more divided country, it's a good time to take one step back and reflect on the state of our liberty, where we stand 243 years after the birth of freedom in this land. Has July 4th and independence itself lost its meaning in the interconnected global economy and culture of the 21st century? Will we revive or resist that which made America great? It's admittedly sad that we feel compelled to even ask these questions, but as a once unthinkable balkanization of America continues unabated and the nation divides into tribal units living in separate and irreconcilable worlds, reality bites. As we celebrate or commemorate or ignore almost a quarter of a millennium of freedom flowing from this experiment called a constitutional republic, let none of us understate how the very concept of this independent nation was radical to its core. The notion that a distant colony under the boot of the world's most powerful empire would not only break free, but put into practice an audacious theory of self-governance unparalleled in centuries of civilization was virtually inconceivable. The founders, with the unbridled courage to rebel, and the framers of the Constitution with the collective wisdom to actualize their vision, produced a swath of individual rights that remain uniquely American more than 2 centuries beyond the ratification of the Constitution. No other nation guarantees free speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press and the right to bear arms and the right to a speedy trial and the additional bundle of rights which protect our individual liberty, however eroded they may appear in the fullness of time. And no nation has produced more prosperity in the history of civilization. So why is the nation increasingly threatened from within by forces seeking to tear down the foundations upon which it was built? Why has July 4th, for many, turned from a celebration of all things American to a debate over whether America is actually worth celebrating? Furthermore, how many more disastrous experiments in tyranny, anathema to the enlightened ideals of America, must we see littered along the trail of tears that is collectivism in the futile search for a perfect world populated by imperfect people? Here's the central question for the resistance. If America is the unjust society you claim it to be, why do the poor and tired and huddled masses still yearn to breathe our freedom? The waves of desperate immigrants presently drawn to our land by the promiscuous promises of those committed to opening our borders present an unfortunate reality, but also an ultimately fortunate conclusion. America remains the go-to beacon of freedom in a dark world. More questions for the social justice warriors. If America is unworthy of celebration or even commemoration this weekend, what about the more than 1 million souls who lost their lives during a war to end slavery and extend rights to all our people? What nation rescued the world from totalitarian tyranny of every stripe, from Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union, at the cost of untold human treasure? Can you not stand in awe of the nation's founders, men of great privilege, wealth, and comfort, who were willing to risk certain execution for the sake of an experiment granting unparalleled power to the unwashed masses? People just like you? The gulf between the revivalists and resistors has become so wide as to stoke fears of a second war, cold or hot, between the states. At the heart of it is the increasingly troublesome national argument about the very definition of what America has been, is, and should be. One side treasures the individual, the other values the group. The revivalists affirm the melting pot, which has defined the nation from its inception, recognizing the sovereignty of every person, but also that the embrace of shared values, a common creed, stands at the heart of our national character. The growing ranks of resistors dream of a mosaic, multiple and partitioned cultures in coexistence, unburdened by the nation's blood-stained history and illegitimate foundation. The fading anthem of E pluribus unum, out of many one, is threatened to a degree we have not witnessed since the conflagration of the mid-19th century, the Civil War. It's been steadily replaced by a political correctness that represents nothing less than the slow drip of despotism. But 2020 beckons, and one of those once radical and now fundamental privileges of freedom will soon be exercised afresh as the nation's electorate weighs in on the question of which future America should embrace, the revival of or resistance to that which made the nation great in the first place. We'll take a quick break and then come back to discuss This Week in Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, as we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Okay, Scott, we've got a number of stories directly affecting liberty to discuss, but first I want to put to you the question that I put to Sarah Cowgill and Jeff Charles earlier in the show.
Mm-hmm.
On this July 4th weekend. Simple question with maybe a complicated answer.
Okay.
What does it mean to be a patriot?
Tim, it means to love your country, not just in an academic way or a thoughtful way, but in a way where you feel it in your bones, I think. You have a fondness, like it's almost to maybe anthropomorphize or something like that, where it's beyond ephemeral creation.
Anthropomorphize.
Yes, that's to treat something as human that is not
look,
human.
We already think you're smart. You don't have to use $10 words.
So I think that it can be misplaced. It's not always a great thing, but it's not a bad thing necessarily either.
Is it my country right or wrong? Are the real patriots the ones who defend their country no matter what, or the ones who will criticize their country no matter what?
That's a good question. I think that the young men the stout young men who were guarding Chairman Kim from the North would see their service as most patriotic. Their culture and society builds it up as such, and we can't tell them that it's not patriotic, even though they act in service of a horrible dictator. So it's a complicated question.
With an even more complicated answer. All right, let's move on to the agenda which you present for Liberty this week, both good and bad. This first one, I'm just going to read the headline you gave me because it's very intriguing. A new law stops the IRS from stealing people's money simply because it deems their bank deposits suspiciously small.
This has to do with the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, which is, if you know about the $10,000 reporting requirement, any banking transaction you engage in at $10,000 or above,
right,
a Treasury Department gets the notice. Well, that was established in 1970. Then, what people who wanted financial privacy did, as you might imagine, they made their financial transactions in amounts less than $10,000 if they didn't want that notice to be sent.
Mm-hmm.
But the government didn't like that. So then they actually made it a crime in order to create financial transactions for the purpose of avoiding that reportage at $10,000.
But, Scott, we need more federal laws. We don't have enough.
That's so great. So that is called structuring. The crime of structuring, Tim, is the crime of engaging in financial transactions to avoid the reporting requirement. That's it. There's no other element, of the crime. It's just If you did something in a financial transaction in order to prevent the federal government from seeing it because of the $10,000 limit in the Bank Secrecy Act, you're guilty of a federal crime.
Now, if you put in $9,999, how do they prove that you meant to dodge the system by putting it in as a dollar under $10,000?
Well, Tim, after the IRS comes in and accuses you of structuring and seizes all your bank accounts and your money and put locks on your businesses and takes away your computers and your files, and then you borrow money from friends and family to pay the six-figure defense bill for the attorneys, and then 3 years passed, we'll find out how the IRS defends it, okay? That's what this legislation changes. So there are, I think, maybe some negative aspects of this legislation. I haven't read every jot and tittle yet, but the big change that is celebrated, that is good news for liberty, that we can celebrate with the Taxpayer First Act, is that when property is to be seized by the revenue in structuring cases, it has to be derived from an illegal source or some other criminal purpose for violating. It's not just, hey, you wanted financial privacy.
So they have to prove that it's dirty money.
You were a coke dealer. You were stealing whatever. It doesn't matter, but it's got to be a crime beyond just the privacy aspect. And you get a hearing, I think it's in 1 month, 30 days of the seizure, you're entitled to a hearing. So what we had before is literally people waiting years to get their money back. So, and typically how this happens, Tim, is these people they have a little bit of cash in terms of their deposits, but they don't have the cash to make a six-figure defense of a case like this. So it's like a very small one-off grocery store, okay? And they're making deposits, as you might imagine, in the thousands of dollars, but not tens of thousands of dollars. So some IRS official looks at it and they've got 8 deposits in the $8,500 range. All of a sudden, it's a structuring case. Well, it's not a structuring case. It's just that's what Lou's Grocery takes in a weekend,
And so there are victims, innocent victims of this law who may appear to be doing something illegal, but they aren't. But as we've said, there's so many federal laws. It's like you said, what is it, 3 times a day? What's the name of the book?
3 felonies a day.
3 felonies a day, where the average person is committing 3 felonies per day, unbeknownst to them. Let's move on. The parents, this is inevitable, the parents of one of the victims of that horrific Las Vegas massacre has sued the gun manufacturer.
I think this is a real broadside against the Second Amendment, Tim. This is James and Anne Marie Parsons, who are a Washington couple, and their daughter Carrie was murdered by Hatfill in the Vegas massacre. And they've sued with Josh Koskoff, and he's the same lawyer for a bunch of the Sandy Hook families. Right. This guy is, an anti-gunner extreme lawyer, and he got the court to agree that they can file suit on this. This goes to the bump stock ban. So Hatfill used bump stocks affixed to the AR-15 to murder a bunch of these people. The premise of this lawsuit is that because the federal government has ruled that those bump stocks are now a machine gun. You'll recall that Donald Trump just changed the law with the stroke of his pen and said this previously legal product is now a machine gun. The Koskoffs and the Parsons family is saying the firearms manufacturer should have known that the firearms they were making could have easily been altered into machine guns, and therefore that was extreme negligence, which must be punished with the massive award. And I just want to say that the reason why it's such a broadside is because if it's allowed and it goes through, it will be the death of firearms manufacturing in the United States. We may get foreign sales, but that's it.
Yeah, BMW produced my car and should have been aware that I would use it to run someone over.
There is a federal law designed to protect against this kind of suit. It's called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, and it was passed because if it weren't, all these... Right. But for right now, anyway, now we'll see that there could be more federal court play on this point, but for right now, anyway, they're going to be able to sue on this, and the designation of those bump stocks, Tim, as machine guns, I think is going to play a key factor in how the court rules.
All right, the police have agreed to pay a woman $750,000 after raiding her house and killing her dog over an unpaid gas bill.
Tim, we've talked a bunch about the warrant requirement, and sadly, even how that is often abrogated. But even when they go through the trouble, it's easy to get. And what a shame it is. And I saw this jumped off the page at me, and I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention as a great example of how this can go awry. This woman, Angela Zorich, she had an unpaid utility bill. They cut off her utilities. The city doesn't allow houses to be without utility service. Basically, it's a prelude to them being abandoned, I guess they think, or something like that. So they call them problem properties, and then they send people by to address it. That's what was going on with her. She was being foreclosed on and was in financial distress. Well, it got worse when they sent a SWAT team to knock down her door, and then with guns, and then they murdered her dog in the course of the raid.
Sounds like the Mueller investigation.
It's and it's $750,000 that the St. Louis County taxpayers are going to have to pay this woman. But the thing is, Tim, the judge didn't lose their seat. The police officers who applied for the warrant and the supervisors who approved the application, they haven't been fired or disciplined. It's just the taxpayers who take it on the chin. Meanwhile, the citizens, what are we to do?
I got time for a couple more stories. No more bikinis for baristas in a city in the state of Washington. This goes somewhat counter to the countercultural trends we're seeing on the West Coast, Scott.
You know, the Ninth Circuit gets it wrong so much. They get it wrong here as well.
Imagine.
Tim. This is the Hillbilly Hotties chain out of Everett, Washington.
Since Hooters is no longer doing so well, they had to take over from them. Is that it?
Part of their personal expression, Tim, of the baristas in that establishment is
Thanks
that they
for
wear
rolling the R's.
Is that they wear bikinis just for you. The federal judge that they so the city says you're not allowed to wear bikinis anymore. You got to wear shorts and a tank top. And they say, hey, this is First Amendment speech, and your law is also vague about what constitutes appropriate attire. And a federal judge agrees with them and grants an injunction against the city enforcing the law. They fight the injunction to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit says, well, it's actually not free speech to wear a bikini while you're serving coffee.
Okay, finally, Scott, the Second Circuit has ordered sunlight on a huge tranche, a big bunch of files from Jeffrey Epstein. Who is this guy, and why are they after him?
Well, this is the guy that partied with Clinton and Trump and other VIP men.
He's a bipartisan sexual predator. Yeah.
They allege that he basically had this private island where he took underage women to have his way with them. And he was accused of basically inappropriate sexual activity with minors, and he got what many people think is a sweetheart deal because of his political connections. Now, knowing what I do as a person who's been licensed to practice law in these United States, Tim, it does not shock me to learn that a person who is fabulously wealthy with friends in massively powerful places gets better treatment than somebody who doesn't. The good news is that the reason for the judge, the Second Circuit ruled that the documents should be released is because public access would benefit the judicial system, and it's for the public's interest that they're released. So there's a bit of a tabloid value there that's off-putting, but I think it's far surpassed by the public's right to know when you see a rich and famous person. You know, how did they get the deal they got? We know, for instance, from the Smollett case that there are interesting factors that often play behind the scenes in these areas.
Interesting wouldn't be the word I would use, but we'll let it stand at that. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides, all available on demand anytime, any place at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station, still fighting for liberty. Till next time, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.